right, howdy hi there, thrill seekers. That was a little bit of Fly Me to the Moon, the old Frank Sinatra song, done in the style of Neil Young, because I was listening to Neil Young's album Live Rust yesterday, and he played the song Like a Hurricane. And I thought, as I always think, every time I hear that song, it sounds like a ripoff of Fly Me to the Moon. And I looked on the internet, and I found one person on some Reddit thingy commenting about that, nobody else. But so maybe me and that person are the only ones who ever noticed this. Anyway, I got one of my FAQs yesterday, or maybe day before yesterday, doesn't matter, in which someone asked me about, do you need to be a monk to study Buddhism? He kind of gave the idea that he thinks that if you're not a monk, your practice of Zen is kind of half-assed. And so this question is sort of like, do you need to be a monk to be enlightened? And I had a look through my videos from the past year, and it doesn't look like I've addressed this topic in at least 1 year, but I'm pretty sure I've addressed it on this channel in the past. I don't remember when. So, to answer that question, I actually tackled that question in my latest book. So I get to do a plug for my latest book, which is now not even all that new. I think it's about 2 years old. Anyway, it is The Other Side of Nothing, The Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being. And if we turn to chapter 10, Right Action, this is where I talk about it. Because what I said to the guy who asked me that question was, Dogen sure seemed to think that you had to be a monk to become enlightened, or you had to be a monk to really practice Zen, however you want to put it. But did he? That's the question. But did he really? So in this book, I go through a chapter by Dogen called The 37 Elements of Bodhi. And here's where he goes through the basic ethical precepts of Buddhism. When he comes to right action, which is one of the standard things that you find in the, the Noble Eightfold Path, is right action. I believe it is number 4, it's somewhere around there. Here's what I wrote. Let me just read you what I wrote. But what does Dogen say about right action in the 37 Elements of Bodhi? Well, it's funny you should ask. In the last few chapters, I've told you the entirety of what Dogen had to say about the first 3 folds of the Noble Eightfold Path. That was easy because what he had to say amounted to just a few sentences. When it comes to right action, however, Dogen goes on for 6.5 pages. You might imagine that if he devoted so much space to right action, he's going to tell us in painstaking detail exactly what actions are right and why. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Instead, he goes on an epic rant about how it's better to be a monk, male or female, than to be a layperson. Here's a small sample, and here's a quote. This is from the Nishijima Cross translation. It goes like this. Notwithstanding scant pursuit of the truth by lay people, there is no past example of one arriving at the truth, one of these lay people. When we arrive at the truth, we inevitably leave family life, and I put in, i.e. join a monastic order, because that's usually what that phrase means when he says leave family life. How can people who are not able to leave family life succeed to the position of a Buddha? Nevertheless, for the last 200 or 300 years in the great kingdom of Song, which is China, people calling themselves priests of the Zen sect have habitually said pursuit of the truth by a layperson and pursuit of the truth by one who has left family life are just the same. They are a tribe of people who have become dogs, just like Ziggy. I'll show you Ziggy later. He's sitting right here. He's laying right here as I talk about this. They're a tribe of people who have become dogs for the sole purpose of making the filth and urine of lay people into their food and drink. Yuck! Furthermore, he says, the monks who speak such words are Devadatas, and Devadatta is sort of the Buddhist equivalent of Judas. He's a monk under the Buddha, the original OG Buddha, who rebelled and may have even plotted to kill Buddha, although it's a little bit murky there. So he's like saying they're Judases. He goes on, in order that they might feed upon the tears and spit, they produce childish and demented talk like this. They are deplorable. They are not the kindred of the 7 Buddhas. They are demons and animals. So he's really forthright. And like I said, it goes on for 6.5 pages. And you're welcome. I'm not going to go into the whole 6.5 pages. But I wrote this. However, Dogen might be calling himself a Judas here. because in one of his most famous pieces of writing, Bendowa, which is usually translated as something like a talk on the pursuit of the way, the Buddhist way, that is, he writes, "Someone asks, should this practice also be undertaken by laymen and laywomen, or is it performed only by people who have left home, aka monks and nuns? I say, an ancestral master has been heard to say that with respect to understanding of the Buddha Dharma, we must not choose between men and women, high and low." And right after that, we read, "Someone asks, people who leave home get free of all involvements at once, so they have no hindrances in practicing zazen and pursuing the truth. How can a busy layperson devotedly do training and be at one with the unintentional state of Buddhist truth?" And Dogen gives a long answer, but part of it is, the Buddhist ancestors overfilled with compassion, left open a wide gate of compassion so that all living beings could experience and enter the state of the truth. What human being or God could not want to enter? Thus, when we study the past and the present, there are many confirmations of such experience and entry. And this is followed, this is what I wrote here, by several examples of famous lay people of ancient China who pursued the Buddhist truth and practiced zazen. So he goes on like that, So in Bendowa, he says, yes, lay people can get enlightened. In the 37 elements of Bodhi, he says, no, absolutely not. Now, Bendowa was written in 1231, and the 37 elements of Bodhi was written in 1244. According to some scholars, Dogen changed his mind sometime in those 13 years and decided that what he said in Bendowa was wrong. A lot of people take that position. Now, here is what Shohaku Okumura has to say about this. He says, his opinion about why this change happened. Dogen had some disappointment after working hard with aristocrats. I think he had some disillusionment about the people in the upper class of society like emperors. His father was a secretary of the emperor. His grandfather was a prime minister, so he knew that society. When he was young, he was kind of idealistic. He thought that if he presented genuine Dharma, people would accept it and support him and create a good Dharma world. But after 10 years of practice in Kyoto, he found that was a dream. And then Okumura Roshi talks about how he tried to work with a politician, and the politician turned out to be a big phony who was just getting into Buddhism to look good. And here's what he says in conclusion. Dogen, wanted to create a place where sincere people can get together and practice with him. To encourage those people who came to practice with him at this remote place, he wrote this kind of admonition or warning to his disciples. He's talking about the stuff he says in the 37 elements of Bodhi about filth and urine and dogs and all the rest of it that I just read. I'm not sure he wanted to return to a separation between lay and monastic practice, but he wanted to make a small place where a small number of people could practice. I don't think he rejected lay people, but his idea was for a small number of monks to practice at a monastery in a quiet place, and for lay people to support and join that practice whenever they can. This is similar to the original form of the Buddhist Sangha. So this is kind of more or less what I think. I feel like these pieces where Dogen says that only a monk can become enlightened and really practice zazen, and the others are filth and urine and dogs and poo-poo and whatever. He was living in, I think, what is it called? Gifu Prefecture? I think it's called Gifu. Anyway, he's living high up in the mountains. I visited it once back in like 1994 or something like that, to the monastery that he established there, a Heiji. And even now, or even 1994, well, it's still the same as it was in 94, really. It's way out there, really far away from anything. You know, there are shops and supermarkets and such like around it nowadays, but in Dogen's time there was nothing like that. There probably weren't even good roads to get to the place. So, you know, and it's up in the mountains, so it snows hard, and that's the side of Japan where it really gets a lot of snow. In the winters, life was tough there. No air conditioning, no heating, no cable TV, no internet, no nothing. And he wanted to... He didn't want his monks to think that they they'd be just as well off to have stayed home in a nice place rather than coming up here. So he's trying to encourage them more than he's trying to say, those lay people are terrible. He's more trying to say, you guys are doing something that's important and, meaningful. And you got to remember, I once asked a Dogen scholar how many people he thought read Dogen's works when Dogen was alive. And I said, do you think it was 50? And this guy who was a big Dogen scholar said, I think it was far less than that, far fewer than that. So he wasn't, nowadays, thousands, maybe millions of people have read Dogen's words. I don't know if it was really, especially things like the 37 Elements of Bodhi, I don't think they were really ever intended for a wide audience. They were speeches that he gave to his monks. So you got to put that in context. On the other hand, he was rewriting stuff that Bendoa only has the date of 1231 on it, but some of his other early pieces have notes saying they were revised in as late as 1252 and things like that. So after the 37 Elements of Bodhi were written. And there's no evidence that he repudiated Bendoa, for example. He seemed to, although he didn't revise it, he seemed to be just as happy with it when he died as he was when he first wrote it. So I don't think he changed his mind, is my point. And the other point is, who cares, right? Who cares if he did change his mind? Dogen is a person that I look up to as a kind of a genius and a person whose opinion is very valuable. But I don't look up to him as an infallible person, and I don't look to what's written by Dogen as revered scripture or something like that this has got to be right because it's the revered scripture. So it's Dogen's opinion, and it's an opinion that has a good foundation, but it's just, in the end, it's still one man's opinion. The other point is that there's lots of people from other different traditions who never practice Zen. Nisargadatta Maharaj, who I talk about a lot on this channel, for example, he seems pretty deeply enlightened, if you ask me, if you think my opinion's worthwhile on that matter. There are lots of people from traditions that don't have anything to do with Zen who have reached a kind of a deep understanding about the nature of reality. And there's no reason for me to think that, let's put it in terms of God. So, some people don't like that, but I'm going to do it anyway. There's no reason that God would create a universe in which you had to practice a specific religion in a specific way in order to understand what this universe was. I mean, there's probably life forms on all kinds of other planets, and some of them must look like jellyfish that hang around at Navy bases, I guess, flying and looking just like a jellyfish puppet on a string. They probably look just like that. How, if they're intelligent, they probably have questions about the nature of the universe. They're not going to practice Zazen. They're not going to join a Zen Buddhist monastery in the Soto sect. So, yeah, no reason to believe that. As far as my own approach, I don't know what I'm saying, my own thing with this, I have never lived monastically. The longest I ever lived in a monastery was that I spent 6 weeks in Tassajara about, it must be close to 10 years ago now. That's the longest time I've ever spent in a monastery. So if I think some people read my books and I really tried not to give this impression, but they come away with the impression that I spent the 11 years that I lived in Japan living in a monastery, even though I talk about how I worked for a company that made monster movies. I don't know how people reconcile that, but no, I never lived in a monastery. My teacher, Nishijima Roshi, though, did call me a monk. I once said to him point blank, while sitting right in front of him, I said, "Am I a monk?" And he said, "You are a monk." And he would refer to me as Venerable Brad Warner and all this stuff because I'd taken the monk's vow, and he believed that I lived my life like a monk. So even though I was married at the time and everything else and worked a secular job and, all this stuff, Nishijima Roshi's idea seemed to be that being a monk was more taking the vows and using that as a foundation for how to live your life rather than, all the other stuff that goes along with it, like shaving your head and living in a monastery and wearing the robes all the time and et cetera, et cetera. So that seemed to be his belief. A lot of people don't believe that. So I stopped even saying that, and I don't make that argument myself anymore, even though I secretly believe it's true. Because I got so much pushback from it, from weirdo people on the internet who get all upset and go, "You're not really a monk because you're blah, 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 blah." So that's the way I think of it. I don't think you have to live in a monastic to be a monk. Personally, I can't think of a single monastery in America that I would like to spend more than, say, a week at. Really, I'm not impressed by any of them very much. I mean, maybe there's some monastery out there that I haven't been to that I would be impressed if I went to it, so I'm not saying, they don't exist. But of the ones I know of, I'm not going to stay there. So, and there are a lot of monasteries that become toxic places. A lot of them are straight up cults. This is not to say all of them are. I think most of them are nice, sincere places who are trying to do their best to do whatever they do. But that can happen. And there's no guarantee that if you enter a monastic practice, you're going to become a better person. There's no guarantee of any of that. You might enter a monastic practice and just kind of drive yourself bat poop crazy. That can happen. A lot of things can happen. So, yeah, I never did it. I don't think it's necessary. The various experiences that I've talked about that I've had associated with the practice have come about without ever living monastically. So I don't think it's a necessity. But I feel bound to tell you that Dogen wrote that it was. So there you go. Bottom line, I don't think you need to be a monk to become enlightened. I should have put that at the beginning so you could do, you just fast forward and not watch the rest of it. Anyway, that's my opinion. So there you go. If you want to leave a donation for me to give you more opinions, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you'll find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main way of making a living and making whatever. And I appreciate your support. But as always, you don't got to support me if you don't want to support me. Okay, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey, Ziggy. Do you think people should become monks to become enlightened? Do you think that's true? I don't know what they'd do with their doggies if they became monks, because I don't think they allow doggies to live at monasteries. So, in conclusion, I don't think that if you have a doggy, you should become a monk, right? All right, we'll talk to you later, Ziggy. Bye.